And we're going to talk this morning on running the race. How many of you know that life is like a race? Is anybody caught up in a rat race? Sometimes you feel like you're in a rat race of life, that you wonder, where does time go? It seems like you're just constantly running and just doing things all the time. And if we're not careful, we get caught up in the rat race of life. And so it's good to see everybody this morning. Amen. It's good to see you here at the Church of Joy. And thank you for the praise team this morning for leading us into a good spirit of worship. Amen. We're going to talk this morning on running to win. How many wants to win? I don't know about you, but I like to win. I don't like to lose. If I'm going to play a game, I want to win. And some people say it's not about the score. Well, go tell that to Kentucky basketball coach John Calipari, or some of the or Rick Pitino at Louisville, whoever you cheer for. It is about the score. Now there are also some greater strides that we can learn from not winning, and I understand the concept that sometimes, you lose but you learn and all those things. And I understand all those concepts, so don't get me wrong. I understand that totally. But also too, at the end of the day, the winner comes out victorious. And I don't know about you, but I'm a pretty competitive person. And if I play, I like to win. I'm not a sore loser. I don't cheat to win. But I play fair, and I play fair to try to win at what I do. And that's just part of being competitive, is you like to be a winner. And I don't know about you, but in this thing called life and in this race with God, I want to come out a winner. I don't want to be a loser. Because, you know something, you're going to come to the end of this old earthly life, and you will have either said unto you, come unto me, and come on up, or you're going to hear the word say, depart from me, I never knew you. And so that's the difference in being a winner and being a loser. And so I want to talk to you this morning from the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter number 9, and in verse 24, it says, know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize. Can everybody say, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain. Now, I want to read this verse to you out of the Message translation. And the Message is more of a translation. And it says, you've all been to the stadium and seen the athletes race. Everyone runs, one wins, run to win. Let me read that again. You've all been to the stadium and you've seen the athletes race. Everyone runs, one wins, and can everybody say, run to win? Amen. I don't know if you've ever seen a marathon or if you've ever been to a marathon, but in a marathon, the runners will eliminate as much clothing as they possibly can because they want to run the race as quickly as they can run. In other words, when they go out to run a marathon, you don't see them in blue jeans and cowboy boots and a long sleeve shirt and with all of the weights that they can put on their body. You don't see them run a race like that. When you watch a marathon, you will notice that they eliminate as much as they possibly can because they want to win the race. They want to be victorious in the end, and they know that if they carry the excess baggage upon them, then they're not going to be able to win the race. Well, you know something? That same thing is very comparable of our race in our walk with God. You can look at a marathon and how that a sprinter or a runner will eliminate as much baggage in their lives. The same thing is true in us when we're walking in our relationship with Jesus Christ. Many of us are trying to run this race with excess baggage upon us. We have bitterness, we have anger, we have unforgiveness, we have strife in our lives. We have all of these things that are in our lives, and we expect to win the race of life. And in order to win the race that God has called us to do, we're going to have to eliminate the baggage out of our lives. Now, what is baggage? Baggage are those things that we carry with us. Baggage can represent many different things, but baggage is things that we carry with us from our past that we have not been willing to release or to let go. And so we carry those things in our lives for weeks and for months and for years and sometimes even decades, and we never allow those things to be released out of our lives. And what happens is those things eat at us like a cancer, and before we know it, we are giving up in our race, or we're not really fulfilling the race that God has called us to. And so we carry that baggage around in our lives. Now, how is life like a race? Like a race, life has a challenging course with many ups and many downs. How many of you have figured out that in life, some days you're on the mountain and some days you're in the valley? Some days you're up, some days you're down. Now, some of us are up and down too much. But I'm talking about that even if you're walking with God and you're a child of God, you're living for God, you're victorious in your relationship with God, there are some days when you really feel good and you feel like you can accomplish anything and you feel like you could take over the whole world. You feel like you could conquer anything that comes against you. And then there are days that you just kind of, you feel like you're in the valley. You feel like that you're just down there and everybody's walking on you and stepping on you, and you feel like you're being taken advantage of. And before you know it, if you're not careful, you will find yourself in self-pity. Has anybody ever been in self-pity before in their lives? Has anybody ever drowned in self-pity? Is anybody here this morning? Am I speaking to the blank air? Okay. There are some people here then. Okay. Sometimes we get into self-pity, and if we are not careful, we will begin to see ourselves as pitiful little culprits. Everybody is against me. Everybody's out to do wrong against me. Everybody's out to be critical of me. Everybody's out to destroy me. The people at work, I can't work with them because I'm a Christian and I just don't fit in. And if we're not careful, we will begin to look at ourselves as little pitiful human beings, and we will die in self-pity. As a child of God, I've got to get beyond self-pity, and I've got to rise up and become everything that God has called me to be. If God has positioned me into a position, then I need to position myself there and be everything that God has called me to be while I'm there. Be everything that God has called me to be. And so life is like a race. It has challenges in its course with many ups and many downs. It's kind of like a roller coaster ride. Does anybody like to ride a roller coaster? I love roller coasters. I love to go to Kings Island and ride those roller coasters. It's just something about it that it brings back the kid in me. I love to ride roller coasters. And a few years ago, I hadn't been to Kings Island for a few years, and I got on that beast, and I came off the beast, and I thought, man, I can understand now why they say don't ride if you have high blood pressure or some heart condition going on in your life, because when I came off that ride, I felt like my heart was about to come out of my chest. But I was silly enough to go back. We got in line again and rode it again. Well, sometimes we do that in life, don't we? Life can be like a roller coaster, and we get off the roller coaster and we put ourselves right back in the same line to do the same thing over again, knowing we're going to get the same results if we do it again, and yet we get back in line for it and wait for it to happen. Now, that could be a little bit of insanity going on in our lives. You know what the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get a different result. And in life we do that same thing over and over and over again, and we expect to get a different result, and we get back in the same line and do it over again. We get the same result, and we get back in the same line, do it again, we get the same result. That's the definition of insanity. Well, life can be like a roller coaster. Like a race, life also has a judge who decides where we place at the end. God, one day, we're going to stand before God, and God's going to look at our lives, and we're going to be judged. Now, I believe that we are judging our lives while we live upon this earth. We're really judging our own lives. We have the Bible that we go by that says this is how it's to be and this is how it's to go. And so we have the choice in life, and we're judging our lives as we go through life. That little dash as we live in life. We're born into this world, we die out of this world, but that little dash in the middle is representation of the choices that we make as we go through life. And so we are making our choices. We are creating our own judgment. And so when we come to the end of life, there will be a judge who decides where we are placed at the end. Also, like a race, life has a finish line. It's called rapture or death. Life has a finish line. Also, life, like a race, it ends with winners receiving the reward. How many times have you seen somebody that finished last get an award for the race that they won? Typically, you have a first place, a second place, or a third place, but nobody ever remembers who finished second or who finished third. We only remember who finished first. It's kind of like the Final Four in basketball. It's hard to remember last year who was in the Final Four, but most of us can remember who won the championship. It's a lot easier to remember who wins than it is who loses. In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 it says, "Wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight." Can everybody say weight? Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Now, in this verse, it's talking about laying aside the weights. Now, apparently there is a difference in weights and sins. We have sins that are in our lives that hold us down, yes, but we also have weights that are in our lives that may not necessarily be a sin or a heaven or hell issue, but they are weights that are holding us down, and they're stripping us from being the very best that God wants to offer for our lives. And so what happens is those weights, They kind of go around our ankles and they hold us down, and every time we try to move forward and we try to advance and we try to do something in the kingdom or we try to better ourselves, there is a weight that is there on my ankle and it's holding me down. And so as I begin to move, I'm kind of crippled in my body and I can't do it because I'm holding the weights upon my life. In 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verses 7 and 8, it says, "I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto them also that love his appearing." Now, Paul says, I have fought a good fight, I have finished my course, and I have kept the faith. Can you think of a more rewarding thing to be said about you when you can't come to the end of your old earthly life than to have these words said about you? Not that you had a beautiful home or you had a beautiful car or you had a lot of money in the bank. Those things don't matter anymore. Those things are useless at that point in your life. But when somebody can look back over your life and they can say, he or she kept the faith, he or she finished the course, or he or she fought a good fight, then you can say that you have been successful in life. You see, oftentimes we measure success by worldly values. How big our homes are, how shiny our car is, how much we have in the bank. And we can say, my goodness, they have been so successful. They have this, they have that, they have those things. Ladies and gentlemen, those things are just success in the worldly system. But there is coming a day in time when you're going to have to stand before the judgment seat of God, and success is going to be measured by, did you keep the faith, did you fight the course, and did you finish the race? Amen. Give him a hand clap of praise. You see, from the world's perspective, winning is based on material things. Maybe intelligence. The smarter that you are, the more respect you will receive. Or maybe it's wealth. The more money you have, then the happier you will be. Well, that's not the case. We see a world of people that have a lot of money and they're dying and they're committing suicide and they're doing things that they should not be doing. Money does not create happiness. Maybe it's image. The better you appear, the more popular you will be. And so we try to create a good image, and I believe that we should have a good image, but I'm simply saying that image is not what we consider success in life. Power, maybe it's power. The stronger you are, the more control you will have. But from God's perspective, winning is based upon something entirely different. In Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11 it says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor is the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to the men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. He said the race is not to the swift, nor is the battle to the strong. Here's what it says in the CEV version. It says, here is something else that I have learned. The fastest runners and the greatest heroes don't always win races and battles. Wisdom, intelligence, and skill don't always make you healthy, rich, or popular. We each have our share of bad luck. You see, you may not like the principle of life, but there's nothing you can do about it, because if you're like me, you have found out that life is not fair. Life in itself is not fair. Life in itself is not easy. And our human handicap is that we can try ever so hard to succeed and still fail, and sometimes through no fault of our own. It's simply life. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 45, it says that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. The plain fact of the matter is that no matter how hard you try in life, no matter how hard you try to run this race in life, we still have the outcome up to chance, and that is, unless we run the race that God intends us to run, then we're never going to come out finishers in the end. In Romans 9 and verse 16 is said, so then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. You see, the world views success as being number one, but God views success as making him number one. There is no question that the race of life is going to be full of disappointment, full of discouragement, full of defeat, but we can overcome all of that if our hope is in Jesus Christ this morning. Amen. I hope this morning that your hope is in Jesus. I hope that your hope this morning is not in the stock market, that it's not in your bank account, that it's not in your home, that it's not in your family, that it's not in any of those things, but I hope this morning that your hope is founded and rooted in Jesus Christ. Because Paul said, if I have hope in this world only, I am of all men most miserable. My hope has to be found in the saving work of Jesus Christ. My hope has to be found in Him, that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that if God calls me out of this world today, that I know that I know that I know that I know that I am ready to meet Jesus. There is nothing in my life that I have that makes me not ready. I know that I'm ready to meet Jesus. That's what hope is this morning. I want to share with you a little story. At 7 p.m. on October 28th, 1968, a few thousand spectators remained in the Mexico City Olympic Stadium. It was cool and it was dark, and the last of the marathon runners, each exhausted, were being carried off to the first aid stations. More than an hour earlier, a guy by the name of Mamo Wolde of Ethiopia, looking as fresh as he did when he started the race, crossed the finish line, and he was the winner of the 26-mile marathon. Has anybody ever ran a 26-mile marathon? I know that I haven't. I don't see it in sight. But a 26-mile marathon. As the remaining spectators prepared to leave, those sitting near the marathon gate suddenly heard the sounds of sirens and police whistles, and all the eyes turned to the gate. A long figure wearing the colors of Tanzania entered the stadium. His name was John Stephen Akwiri. He was the last man to finish the marathon. As he finished the marathon, his legs were bloodied. He had bandages on his legs. He had severely injured himself in a fall during the race. And with each step, he would grimace himself with each step of the race. He hobbled around the track, and the spectators rose and they applauded him as if he were the winner of the race. After crossing the finish line, the man slowly walked off the field without ever turning to cheer the crowd. In view of his injury and having no chance at all to win a medal, the reporter asked him, and they said, "Why did you not quit the race? I mean, you were injured, you were scarred in the race. Why didn't you quit? Why didn't you give up? There was no way that you were going to win. Why did you finish the race?" And here's his reply that I thought was so monumental. He said, "My country did not send me 7,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 7,000 miles to finish the race." Ladies and gentlemen, I share that with you to share with you this morning. There are many of us here today that have been injured in the race. You might come to points and obstacles in your life where you feel like giving up and stopping and quitting and throwing up your hands and saying, "I give up if this is the way that it is. I just give up and I throw up my hands and I quit and I succeed to the mission that God has called me." Can I say to you this morning that God that began the work inside of you is the God that wants to bring it to completion in your life? And that if God called you to do it, then God will equip you with the power to make it through. I didn't begin this race of life to quit. I didn't begin this race of God to just give up. I didn't begin this race with God that when the enemy comes in like a flood to just give up and say, "I just give up." God has called me for a greater purpose, and God has called us for greater things. And so when we begin the race, we need to pick ourselves up every time that we fall. It doesn't matter how many times you fall. It matters how many times you get up and get back up on the race of life again. Give Him praise in this house. In Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 19 it says, which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil. Now the Bible calls hope an anchor of the soul. Everybody knows what an anchor is. An anchor is something that stabilizes. It stabilizes something. It keeps something from drifting. Without an anchor, a boat is at the mercy of the winds and the currents. And so when a fisherman will go out and fish on the lake, they will throw an anchor down so that the boat will stay in the geographical area where they want it to stay in. And so it doesn't drift with the winds and with the currents. You see, that's what we've got to do this morning. We've got to be anchored in the mercy and the hope of God, so that when the winds and the currents come in, we too don't drift off and filter away and just fly out, and nobody ever knows what happened to us or where we went. We've got to be anchored in the hope of Jesus Christ. You see, without an anchor, a boat is at the mercy of the winds and currents, and without hope to carry us through, we're at the mercies of life's unpredictable weather. One of the Old Testament words for hope is a Hebrew word that is pronounced tikva. Tikva, which literally means a cord. It comes from another Greek word by the name of kava, which means to bind together by twisting. It's like a braid. It's something that when we come together in the hope of God, it's like a cord, and it's braided with us and Him, and it can't be drifted, it can't be shaken, it can't be taken away. Hope connects us to the throne of God. And this same Hebrew word is translated wait in Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 31, when it said, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They that wait, the kava, the wait upon the Lord, He shall renew their strength. And He said, and they shall mount up with wings like eagles, and they shall run, and they shall not be weary, and they shall walk, and they shall not faint. Ladies and gentlemen, we might be weary this morning, but we're not going to faint. We might feel like giving up, but the Bible said that we're going to run, and we're not going to grow weary if we don't give up, and if we don't stop, and if we don't give up in life, and we just keep pushing and going and moving forward and propelling in the things that God has called us to do. Don't give up on your dreams. Don't give up on your ideas. Don't give up on the ministry. Don't give up for what God has called you to be and what God has called you to do. Just keep pressing and keep pushing, and one day God is going to reward you for your faithfulness. Can you give Him praise? Hope is being connected to God. God brings us renewed strength in the race of life. If we run connected to God, we win. But if we don't, we will not finish the race. And so we have to run this race correctly. It's important that we run it correctly. We have to run like we're winners and not losers. I want to share with you this morning, just for a few minutes, wrong ways to run the race of life. The first thing that I can think of in running race the wrong way is running religiously without power. Running religiously without power. There is no power in religion. The power comes in relationship with Jesus. I know I say it over and over and over again, but you can come to church until you're blue in the face, and you can be the most religious person in the world and die and not make it into heaven because you never knew Jesus, and Jesus never knew you, and you never accepted Jesus into your life. You come and you give in the offering. That does not save you, because we are not saved by our good works. We are saved through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so running religiously without power. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 5, it says, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. You know something? The Pharisees were religious. They went through the motions, but they never had a genuine experience with the Lord. They knew the right words to say. They knew how to appear. They knew how to look. They knew what to do. They knew the Bible. They knew the Old Testament. But they had little reality or a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ. And I'm afraid that the church world today has become like the Pharisees. We have a religious mindset. We have so many religious ideals and religiosity as it's called. And we don't really have a genuine relationship with Jesus Christ. I'm talking about the church as a whole across the world today. Is we have become a church like the Pharisees, where we know the Word of God. We know about the things of God, but we don't really know who He is. If He walked in the door, we would not know Him, and we would not feel Him, nor would we know the Spirit of God if it landed on us, because we serve in a religious kind of way. In Matthew 22 and verse 29, it said, Jesus answered them and said unto them, you do err, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. In Revelations 3 and verse 1, it said, and the angel of the church in Sardis write, these things saith, hath he not 7 spirits of God and 7 stars? And I know thy works, that thou hast a name, and thou livest and art dead. You look at Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist. He was a little bit like this. He was in the temple every week performing his religious duties and worshiping faithfully. But when God broke into his life, he could not respond by faith, because he had gotten so used to the status quo that he did not recognize when it was truly God. You look at the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. He was definitely like this. He laid at beside the pool for so many years, waiting for the waters, so that he didn't even recognize his deliverance when Jesus was standing right beside him. And so we cannot run religiously without power. Number 2 is we cannot run the race running from your enemies. Running from your enemies. There will obviously be times in our lives when we should avoid physical confrontations, if at all possible. There are oppressive situations at times that we need to get away from. However, one thing that we should never flee from, and that is our spiritual enemies. In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 12, it says, wherefore lift up the hands which hang down, and the feeble knees. The word feeble in this verse comes from the Greek word paraluo, from which we get the English word that means paralyzed. Now, what fear does in our lives, I call fear false evidence that appears real. False evidence that appears real. What fear does is fear paralyzes our lives. Fear keeps us from doing what God has called us to do, because we are fearful of what if this happens, what if that happens, what if I don't succeed, people are watching me, and I fall into the spirit of fear, and what happens is fear paralyzes my life. You see, that's what happened to Israel right after they experienced a religious or experienced a glorious deliverance from Egypt. After God totally decimated their enemies, they were still intimidated when they saw the giants that were in Canaan. They wanted God to deal with the Canaanites in the same way that He had just dealt with the Egyptians. they wanted him to deliver them so that they did not have to go out and fight the battle themselves. And so when that did not occur, they lost their confidence. Now, I used to work in the sales world as a sales manager, and I would teach my salespeople that if you want to be successful in sales, you cannot be successful if you don't have confidence in who you are. You can be the greatest of all things, but if you are not confident in yourself, and if you are not confident in what you are portraying and what you're trying to sell, you will not be able to sell. And so we've got to have confidence. There comes a point in your life where you have to stand up and you have to look at the adversary in the eye and you have to say, yes, you have come against me, but I have someone that is greater in my life, and his name is Jesus. I can fight every battle. I can fight everything that comes against me because I am more than a conqueror through Jesus Christ who loves me. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. So there comes a point in life where you have to square your shoulders up and you have to fight for yourself. Yes, God is in the battle with you and God is going to be behind you, but you've got to stand up and you've got to fight. The next step was predictable. They began to magnify their enemy's power above their own and even above God's power. You see, running life's race the wrong way, what it does is it distorts our vision. And we look at our enemies through a magnifying glass. And so what happened is when the spies went over, they began to magnify the situation, and they began to magnify, and they said, oh no, we can't go over there because there are giants in the land. We can't go over there because, we look like grasshoppers in their sight. Ladies and gentlemen, can I submit to you this morning that you with God on your side equals a majority? Every time you see God defeat nations and defeat armies in the Bible, there were always less people on the side that God was with, but greater is God that is in you than he that is in the world. If God has called you to do something, you step out and do it and make it happen. Fight the battle and realize that God is my stronghold. Get behind me, devil. My name is in the book of life. I am a child of God. I've got his blood flowing through my veins. I am more than a conqueror through Jesus Christ who loved me. Mark Twain said, I am an old man and have grown great and have known great many troubles, but most of them never happened. Let me say that again. I am an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never even happened. Did you know that most of the things that we worry about in life never even happen? We worry our lives away and they never even happen. The third thing is running with your enemies. So running from your enemies and running with your enemies is a wrong way to run. Judas Iscariot definitely ran the wrong way in life's race. Even though he started off with good motives, he believed that the Messiah would overthrow the Roman government and set up an earthly throne just like any of the other disciples. However, when Jesus did not do this, Judas became incredibly disillusioned, and it created bitterness in his heart that became fatal to Judas. In Galatians 5 and verse 7, it says, ye do run well. Ye do run well. Who do hinder that you should not obey the truth. I'm going to move along quickly here for the sake of time, but the fourth thing is running away from God. Running away from God. You see, failed expectations in this life can be both devastating and they can be debilitating. It's like a balloon that loses its air. The rapid deflation of our dreams can send our emotions spinning haphazardly out of control. When God gives you a dream and it's been 10 years and 15 years and you have not seen that dream happen, it's easy for the air to be released out of that balloon in your life. And so you feel like giving up on the dreams. This happened to the disciples who never expected the crucifixion to happen. What happens is they collectively begin to run away from God's plan, and they want to go back to their old lives and their old vocations. Enough of this save the world stuff. They said fishing, we understand. And so what they're saying is that we want to run back to our old lives. We want to run back to things that we are comfortable with, things that we know, things of safety, things that we know that we can make it in. When God is saying, I have called you into a lifestyle of faith. When you don't feel me, you just keep on moving. When you don't know that I'm there, you just keep on moving because you're living in faith and you're believing me in faith and you're trusting me in faith to take you through. In John 21 and verse 3, Simon Peter saith unto them, I am going fishing. And they say unto him, we also go with thee. And they went forth and entered into a ship immediately. And that night they caught nothing. Do you think that they caught nothing was a mere coincidence? No way. In His mercy, God was saying, I will not allow you to prosper in running from me back to your old way of life. I am too committed to your destiny. And the only way that you're going to turn around and the only way that you're going to be what I've called you to be is if you move forward in me. You're not going to go back. You're not going to go back to complacency. You're not going to go back to comfortability. You're not going to go back to safety, but you're going to stretch forth in what I have called you to be. And then the fifth and final thing as we return to the music this morning is running ahead of God. Running ahead of God. Has anybody ever ran ahead of God? Me and Marvin are the only ones. I'm going to tell you, we have all gotten ahead of God. After 10 years of waiting for their promised son, Abraham and Sarah began to speculate how they could fulfill the promise themselves without God, if necessary. And the result of that was Ishmael. Ishmael was a son without promise. He was a divided family, and centuries, even today, of political and religious conflict is still going on in the Middle Eastern nations simply because Abraham and Sarah got ahead of the plan of God. They had a promise from God, but yet they stepped out from God and they said, God, I know that you've given us this promise. And so they move ahead of God and they create the promise on their own, and they have a son by the name of Ishmael. But we all know that Ishmael was not the promise of God. And so the wars that are going on in the Middle Eastern nations today are a battle because of Abraham and Sarah decided to get ahead of God. And Abraham and Sarah did something typical of human beings, and they asked God to accept their connived solution and make it His. Here's what they said in Genesis 17 and 18. And Abraham said unto thee, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. Please let my plan, God, become your plan. Ladies and gentlemen, God knows the end from the beginning. He knows the beginning from the end. And God refuses to accept our plans. Why? Because He wants a supernatural element in our destinies that will keep us dependent upon Him. That's why He gives us destinies that rise above anything we could possibly produce on our own. That's how you know if it's a dream from God. It's bigger than you are, and you're not able to do it on your own. You've got to have faith. You've got to have belief in God that He's going to take you through because it's a supernatural dream. That's why He gives us destinies. He doesn't want us to settle for a natural inheritance when you can have a spiritual one. You see, if you run ahead of God, all of us have run ahead of God at points in our lives, and we have produced some Ishmaels. Sooner or later, your fleshly provision will clash with your spiritual destiny. And the Ishmael that is in your life, it's going to have to go. It can be painful, but it's absolutely necessary. And it's for the ultimate good. Even when we have spoiled the plan of God, God has another plan waiting for us. But we're going to have to let go of our plans and move into the plan of God as we stand in this building this morning. How do you win this race of life, you might ask? I'll tell you how you win is you just keep running in the right direction. You just keep moving with what God has called you to do. I want to close with this story this morning in a book of the 10 Laws of Lasting Love. There was a man that was fighting for his life with cancer. And he and his wife, it looked like there was no hope for this man. Anytime a doctor with news of any of the progress would come in, this man said, my wife would join me in a mutual embrace. He said the reports were seldom good during the early phases of the illness. And one day, a doctor brought particularly frightening news. Gazing upon the clipboard, he murmured, it doesn't look like you're going to make it. He said, we're only going to give you just a few weeks to live. He said, before I could ask a question of this doomsayer, my wife stood up, handed me my robe, adjusted the tubes attached to my body, and said, let's get out of here. She said, this man is a risk to your health. And as she helped me struggle to the door, the doctor approached us and he said, stay back, demanded my wife. Stay away from us. And as we walked together down the hall, the doctor attempted to catch us. Keep going, said my wife, pushing through the intravenous stand. We're going to talk to somebody who really knows what's going on. And then she stood up, she raised her hand up to the doctor and she said, don't come any closer. And the two of us moved as one, and we fled to safety in hope of a doctor who did not confuse diagnosis with a verdict. Listen to me this morning. You need to find those in your life that do not mix up or don't confuse diagnosis with a verdict. Don't confuse a diagnosis in your life with a verdict. Don't confuse feelings with the facts. Don't confuse right now with not always. Don't confuse things the way they look as though they are, because sometimes things are not as they seem. We've got to run to win. We've got to run with hope. We've got to run with a cause and with a purpose.